We have a very special edition of Behind the Pole tonight. Some of you may be scratching your head because Behind the Pole typically happens when we're out in the field and we are covering something live, and things start to go a little sideways, and we have multiple cameras that show additional angles and additional stories on what is happening. And so this is not the case today because somebody be like, you guys haven't streamed out in the field for a while. No, it's not. We have a special guest for Behind the Pole tonight, and our guest is Nate Gowdy. Nate Gowdy is probably best known for a Time magazine cover with a picture of Bernie Sanders on it. Nate has been working on creating a book through the Trump administration, which he talks about. And Nate was in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. We had an opportunity, thanks to our Renee, our field producer, who set this up, to interview Nate. We wanted to run a shorter clip, but our interview, like the long clip with him, is almost 30 minutes. And he provided us 34 pictures, which we will publish out on our website. Probably tomorrow, maybe on Saturday. I only kind of waffle because I don't know what the news cycle is. And with that, I'm going to go. We don't have a 30-minute interview. We have a very cut down version of that. We will publish the full version of that interview out on Monday. But with that, let's roll Behind the Pole with Nate Gowdy. We're with Nate Gowdy, photographer out of Seattle, who is probably most famous for his cover photograph that was featured on Time magazine. Nate was in Washington, D.C. during the insurrection that occurred on January 6th. Nate, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here, David.
Nate, you provided us with 34 different images on the events. We're going to talk about a few of those a little bit further in. What I wanted to talk to you first about was, why did you decide to go to Washington, D.C.?
David, I went to Washington, D.C. Because I could, and more importantly, because I've been working on a long-term project documenting presidential politics and protest in the age of Trump. And I've covered more than 300 events across 23 states. And this is the conclusion, the final narrative for my book.
So, Nate, just so our viewers know, you actually did not go into the Capitol, but you were on the Capitol grounds as the situation turned into a full-scale insurrection.
Yeah, I was on the side of the inaugural stage. I believe most of the demonstrators who breached the inside of the Capitol came in through the front. And because our reception was so bad, or my reception, everyone's reception, I wasn't monitoring the news, and it was literally anarchy out there.
Nate, is there a story that jumps out in your mind on something that your camera didn't catch, but that's something your eyes and mind caught? And what would that story be?
So I have tunnel vision on the stills, but I do wish at times I would have turned my phone camera on. Parts that stick out are when the mob found out a woman was tragically shot and killed inside the Capitol. The whole crowd started chanting, "I can't breathe." That struck me. They like to take a lot of leftist slogans and acronyms, and they like to repurpose them and in a way to antagonize their opposition. Other things you can't see in the pictures is these people were organized. They had step ladders. They had huge banners. They were ready to unfurl. They knew exactly what they were doing. There was a contingent of Proud Boys militiamen I caught walking toward the Capitol in the AM when the National Mall was empty. It was barren because all the day's demonstrators were at Trump at his morning address between the Washington Monument and the White House. And I saw them, I came across them on my way there, marching in the opposite direction. When the mob breached barrier after barrier toward the inaugural stage, well, there would have had to have been another contingent of Proud Boys around the front. And so they were already divided up. And so basically they marched to a crowd of no one, literally almost no one, chanting F-word Antifa. And I was there may have been another photographer at some point, another photographer or two, but at first I was the only photographer I knew of, and they were threatening me. And when I said I was, media for Rolling Stone, they made fun of me, and still assumed that, plenty of them seemed to assume I was Antifa. And so I once I realized the danger, because I photographed them before, and at first I was kind of like right in the middle of their crowd, but they were getting really hostile, and they're easily triggered. And so I started keeping my distance a little more. And so they marched toward the Capitol, they kneeled and prayed, and then they broke for lunch. we had ended up near a bunch of food trucks, and so it was lunchtime, and so everyone went and got hot dogs and tacos or whatever, and then they reconvened. They merged with the general populace, and then the insurrection, the attack, it happened so fast. It took a little bit for it to dawn on me what was happening.
Let's talk about a couple of the photos that you had sent over. You'd sent us over a collection of 34 photos. One of them here, the first one we want to talk about is the first photo in this collection of 34 you sent.
Yeah, so normally the Proud Boys they have their trademark black polos with white trim. There is not one of those to be seen on January 6th. And the Proud Boys had telegraphed their intentions ahead of time, saying they had planned to be incognito, even wearing black and trying to mimic the look of Black Bloc. I can see why they maybe did that, because they didn't want to be labeled as Proud Boys, perhaps, with what they were intending to do. But they did have shirts that said Enrique Tarrio did nothing wrong. At one point I asked the leader, which was Rufio, I'm sure you've encountered him here in Seattle. I think he's one of the local Proud Boys from Vancouver, Washington, or wherever he's from. He was leading them in Enrique's absence, and I asked him, is there a quote? I took your photo. Is there something you want to say, for words to put with the photo, pair with the photo? And he said all he wanted to say was "back the yellow."
On the subject of back the yellow, we've seen a number of videos that have come out of the insurrection in the Capitol, where Capitol Police were being taunted, were being told that Republicans hate you, that you should just quit your jobs. We don't back the blue anymore because who do you serve? Did you see any of that? And then what was the expression, the body language? I mean, how did the police react to all of this?
Sure, great question. So they were almost pleading in the front. They were almost pleading with police, letting them know, trying to let them know that they're on the same side. And, like, hey, we don't want to hurt you. We don't want to fight you. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist. And basically they're like, hey, we don't want, don't make us do this. We don't want to have to do this. And so, and meanwhile, and I didn't capture it in a single photo, but, there are Blue Lives Matter, they're waving Blue Lives Matter flags. Meanwhile, they're attacking, they're pepper spraying, they're terrorizing the police forces, who frankly had their kids' gloves on. From what I witnessed, they were doing their best to repeatedly de-escalate. And I've never seen that level in the last year of protests. I've never seen that level of restraint from, Seattle PD.
I saw one video clip where Capitol Police officers dressed in full riot gear are evacuating out of the Capitol. They're walking through a crowd. They're being completely taunted. One officer, they all look very grim-faced and defeated. And one officer, when the insults are getting hurled, turns and it's like, I've seen that turn, right? And it's like, oh, here we go. And the other officers are just pushing them, because the reality is they were so deep in a mob that it would have not gone well, which is probably the tactical reason. It was just like, buddy, keep moving.
They were overwhelmed. They needed backup, and I guess that comes from on high, and Trump obviously didn't want to call in backup, and because they were drastically overwhelmed, and it's just really something seeing photos from BLM protests this summer outside the Capitol compared to the 6th. It's quite a contrast. They were not only outmanned, but they just weren't prepared in the least. I'm still processing what I saw. I mean, the U.S. Capitol being overwhelmed by an anti-democracy protest of a mob of people who who were egged on by their ringleader, the President Trump.
You were telling me that you witnessed essentially some human wave attacks against the police. Could you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so when you get into the epicenter of the inaugural stage, there's a 5-foot wall, and there were a lot of barriers before that wall, and what they would do is they would lean the barriers up against the wall and use the barriers as a ladder. While they were getting pepper sprayed, those people would fall back, recover, and while they fall back, a new wave of people would push in, and they were just kind of come on, we need to do this and keep up holding the line and pushing in, and they were successful.
Nate, you're talking about persons of color there. You have this picture that you took, which is number 14 in the images that you sent to us. Go ahead and tell me the story behind that image.
I guess I don't know. There's not too much story to that for me. Just kind of she was looking back toward the crowd, kind of doing what I was doing, doing a panorama with her phone. But what makes that image distinctive is she was one of very, very, very few people of color in the crowd who were there to support their president.
Nate, as I've experienced, and I know you've experienced, protests of any, whether they're on the left or the right or the middle, if it's a large protest, they can attract some interesting people. And on the photo number 34 you sent to us, there is a interesting individual who is holding 3 different signs with a lot of, it's anti-Semitic at the end of the day, although he just doesn't come out and say it's anti-Semitic. It's as anti-Semitic as you can get. Could you tell us a little bit about interesting anti-Semitic guy?
Well, once I photographed him, he wasn't on the front lines and he wasn't part of the insurrection, directly part of the insurrection, but you always get characters and everyone, I'd say everyone around me that day was on the fringes, social, politically, but this guy is on a different, and also on the fringes in a maybe crazy, different kind of crazy way. And he, once I photographed him, that was one of my last pictures. I'd been out there since 9:30 a.m. I think it was close to 8 p.m. I hadn't used the restroom all day. I'd been on my feet. I've been dealing with threats all day. And so once I took his picture, it's like, I think I'm coming home.
We've been talking to Nate Gowdy, and this has been a very special episode of Behind the Pole. Nate, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I look forward to, and when things calm down, getting a beer sometime.
I would look forward to that. Absolutely. I appreciate that. We'll definitely take you up on that offer. Thank you. Great interview there with Nate. And yes, that was previously recorded. We did that interview today. Excuse me. We're going to, the whole interview is actually almost 30 minutes. There's a fair amount that we had to put on the cutting floor in the interest of keeping this digestible for the show. One of the other things that is really fascinating, and you'll have to come and watch the full version of the interview, and there'll be more pictures in that version. We almost didn't get to see any of those pictures at all. They were almost all lost, and there's a story behind that. And if you want to hear the story behind that story, you're going to have to tune in for that story. And with that, we're going to do a little pause for the cause. Hi, Malcontents. I'm David, the Malcontent, and I'd like to talk to you for a moment about supporting independent media. When you support us, you help us bring the before, during, and after. You help us defend the First Amendment. You help us amplify BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices, and you help us hold leaderships at a local, state, and federal level accountable. None of this would be possible without support by viewers just like you. When you become a patron for as little as $5 a month, you help buy technology, safety equipment, and help cover travel expenses so that we can continue to bring you news that you trust. If you can't become a patron, you can do a one-time donation on Venmo, and your dollars will go to the exact same causes. With your continued support, we can continue to amplify BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices while showing the truth on what is happening in the world around us. Once again, thank you. If you really, we're seeing the comments and we're seeing all of the praise for the interview and the photos, and this wouldn't have been possible if it was not for our patrons and the people that support us on Venmo. And one of the things I want to call out is if you become a patron, you will get early access to our documentary, which is Can You Hear Us?, which is about the events in Seattle from June 1 to July 4. And that will become available in advance to our patrons on January 25th. And then at any level, so even at the $5 level, you will get early access to Can You Hear Us? And then it will become generally available at the end of February. Jennifer, amazing pictures, amazing story.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's a great interview to watch. What a wonderful interview, and like what an experience to be there. But I feel like, I mean, perhaps it really hasn't like fully sunk in yet, because there's a whole lot of like, I mean, how do you I guess cope with that kind of experience? How do you make sense of it? And he says at one point that, you know, he's still trying to make sense of everything that happened. But to be in the midst of that and to really see what's going on, and then talking about them being organized and prepared and having these things like step ladders and things, and you have to wonder, how is it that that many people were able to coordinate at that level from so far across the country and have those kinds of resources and supplies? And I think that's a really interesting question that, you know, it's going to take a very, very long time to answer if we ever fully get that answered. Your sound's off again. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Jennifer, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
What I was saying is that Nate is going to be going back to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration. And,
Wow.
you know, he will be in the belly of the beast. And this will be, you know, the conclusion of his book, because he started in 2015. And unless we plunge somehow into dictatorship, we will his book will come to an end with the inauguration of Joe Biden.
I'm really actually excited for this book, because as a historian, you can get so much out of a picture. So I think these kind of books are far, you know, underrated. And so I'm really, really kind of excited to kind of see this story in pictures.
So we will be, as I said, sharing the collection of photos that Nate has provided. We'll be sharing that on our website. There are additional photos that he has provided that we don't have to Rolling Stone magazine. So look for Rolling Stone magazine, and Nate's work will be covered in there. And